Hi, I'm Dr. Julie Bilodeau, and welcome to the Dissertation Essentials series. This series is meant to help guide you through the different components of dissertation work and really the how-tos of getting started. So in this session, we will talk about the problem statement, and in other videos, you will find information on these topics. So theoretical framework and assumptions, lit review, research questions and hypotheses, general research plan, and benefits and pitfalls. So let's get started with our problem statement session. All right, this is what we're going to be talking about. Before we jump into the problem statement, we're going to connect the dots a little bit, talk about the dissertation overview, and then problem statements. We'll do a development example, and then lastly, framing the argument. All right, so in an effort to connect all the dots, this information is taken from the DBA program and dissertation handbook. So whenever the information is taken right from there, you will see it noted on the slide that you can find this same information directly in the handbook. So the DBA program and learning goals, I've highlighted the ones that pertain specifically to what we're doing in this session. So we're designing, conducting, and presenting applied research that addresses practical business problems, which is what we're talking about, right? How to come up with our problem statement. So we're talking about these problems and how we're going to address them. And then apply contemporary business leadership theories, knowledge, and core business functions, and evidence-based practice to address issues faced by senior leadership. So again, this all comes back to the problem. And then lastly on this page, within our program goals, you can see it's the kind of the general statement there: provide business leaders with research, analytical, critical thinking, and decision-making skills to accomplish and do all of these items here. All of it begins with a strong problem statement, but really with a problem. So let's move on. Again, just connecting the dots for you in terms of how this all fits together within the program. So the Dissertation Essentials series is typically launched during year 2 in preparation to get you towards the end of year 2, which is when this timeline kicks in. So you can see year 2, term 5, which is not where you are now, but where you will be soon enough. So you can walk through, this is also in the handbook, but you can see the schedule of what you will be doing over these terms. So the prospectus, which is the first part of the dissertation work, is going to be done as you're moving. You can see here, prospectus completed. So you're starting at term 5, term 6, and that's really the first time where you will commit to paper your official problem statement. It will be changed and tweaked maybe through the proposal process, but that's really the first time you're going to hit something specific on paper. In an effort to help you be prepared when you get to that step, we go through the different topics in the Essential series, again, beginning with problem. Your timeline here shows you every step of the way. And again, where you're beginning with your major advisor assigned in year 2, term 5. This is also typically where we will have what we call our dissertation summit. So again, during year 2, you are walking through the Essential series videos. And then at the end-ish of year 2, you will attend the dissertation summit, which is kind of a culmination of the different topics in Essentials, and also a good launching pad to move you into the official dissertation work, which again begins with that prospectus. So you will see some overlap in topics between Essentials and the summit, but the summit is a one-time, all-in-one, encompassing session where you're going to hear about these topics together at a time when it's, right before the launch, whereas the Essential series is preparing you as you move through this year. Some of these things may be more useful to you right now, and some may not be as useful until a little later on, but we're, again, kind of moving you in the direction and preparing you. All right, so writing your dissertation, the big picture. it's exciting because while you're not officially starting the dissertation writing yet, you are starting the preparation. So definitely an exciting moment here. And through your dissertation journey, as I mentioned, the first real piece of that is going to be your prospectus, and then that prospectus will be expanded into your proposal. So your proposal, and to an extent your prospectus, are really the document, the tool for you to sell your research, for you to tell us what it is, what are you thinking, what direction are you going in, why is it important, and how are you going to accomplish it? So the prospectus is a miniature version of that, while the proposal is a more comprehensive version of that. For the prospectus and proposal, you need to be able to answer a series of questions. It's kind of like writing, when you're in 5th grade and you learn about how to write a newspaper article, the who, what, when, where, and why, right? So that's also the format that we follow, although I think the W's are in a different order, but that's okay. So the what are you intending to study? Kind of the scope of that research. What will it encompass? What will it entail? The how. So this is going to be your methodology. How are you going to study this? And this is all about, are you going to conduct a survey? Are you going to conduct interviews? And what is, your end goal? What are you hoping to accomplish through that data collection? Why? Why is this topic important? Why should anybody give you permission to conduct research on this topic? When you will complete this work, a timeline. So as you already know, our program is built in a lockstep method. So we have mechanisms within the program structure to keep you on track, right? So you have official dissertation courses, which Research 9008 and 9010, they are not a course in the sense as you're used to taking the traditional subject courses. They are 7-week periods of you working with your advisor and you working on your dissertation work, whatever that might be at any time, whether it's the prospectus, the proposal, the prospectus, the proposal, the literature review, any of the other chapters, collecting data, submitting to IRB, whatever it is. Each of you may be on a little bit of a different schedule based on how you're moving, how quickly you're moving, what obstacles you might be hitting. So you may be on a slightly different schedule from your peers, but overall, you're all going to be on a similar schedule moving in the same direction. So the timeline here, again, it could vary, but it, is generally the same. And then the where. Where are you going to collect this data? The context. So we'll talk a little bit more about this as we move through, but context is really important. And that's kind of what gives you the niche within your dissertation. All right, overall dissertation connection. So again, pulling it back to what you see in the handbook. And the purpose of the dissertation, you can read it there, but the last piece of this, improve practice and advance the state of knowledge in business. That is the ultimate goal of why you are here and what your dissertation will do, right? So in order to get there and eventually improve practice with an advanced state of knowledge in business, there are a lot of steps between here and there, right? So you can see in that second part there, the questions that the dissertation addresses. And that very first one is about the problem. What problem are you investigating? So I tell my advisees that we are going to spend a considerable amount of time on the problem statement. We've devoted a whole essentials session to it because it is so important. It is very difficult to move forward with any of the rest of the work for your dissertation if your problem is not solid. So that's why we are spending so much time on this. All right, and you can see there, answering the questions requires that well-defined problem. Really, all of the work requires that. All right, so considerations. So what is it that we are looking at? These are some basic questions that can help you determine a direction for your research. Some of you at this point already know what it is you want to do and you have your direction laid out, and that's terrific. Others of you could be at the polar end of that and really not even be sure yet. And that's still okay. If you're somewhere in the middle, that's okay too. The goal of these next couple of terms and this essential series and all the work you're going to be doing over these next few months is to put you in a position so that when you are ready to write the prospectus, you have this information ready to go and that you don't spend months, circling around trying to figure this part out. All right, so some basic questions. Are you interested in the topic? You're going to be up close and personal with this topic for quite a while, so it helps if you're interested in it. Is it a major necessity? Maybe not, but certainly going to be better for you if you are interested in it. So don't rely on what others tell you might be a great dissertation direction unless you do have some interest in it. All right. Is there enough literature to support this topic? And you can see I put direct and indirect. So when we talk about literature, generally, we're looking at two different types. So if you want to explore hiring practices in the hotel industry, right? Okay, so the literature you're going to look for is hiring practices within the hotel industry. But think of your literature as a funnel. So we might start off with hiring practices in general, also something about the hospitality industry in general, but then funneling down to hiring practices in hospitality. Now, you can continue to narrow that focus, and with the problem statement or a dissertation direction, we have to be careful that it's not too broad and not too narrow. But for the purposes of this conversation here with direct and indirect literature, we can be broad for the moment, but hiring practices in hospitality. Okay. So again, direct literature is going to be about hiring practices within hospitality. Indirect literature might be just about hiring practices in general, or hiring practices in another industry that you can then assimilate to the hospitality industry. So if you're interested in a topic that does not have a lot of direct research, that could be good, because it could mean that there's definitely a niche here, there's a gap ready for your research to be conducted. So that's terrific. However, you have to make sure that there is at least enough indirect literature, because you have to have enough literature and it has to come from one side or the other or both, right? So keep that in mind as you're looking for articles through your coursework, that literature can be direct or indirect, but you have to have enough of it in order to support the direction of your research. All right. What will you add to this area? So a minute ago, I said the word niche. So kind of what is your niche in this research topic area? If it is a topic that has already been oversaturated and every, thing you hear and read is about this particular topic, maybe there's not a lot of room left for your research. However, if, again, maybe it's a very saturated topic, but there's a specific area that hasn't been explored either of the main topic or the context, right? Maybe there's, for instance, if you're looking at the impact of leadership, okay, that's a very saturated topic. But if you're looking at the impact of transformational leadership in the IT world or in IT organizations, okay, maybe there's not a lot of direct research done on that. So that would open up an area for you. So figuring out what you're going to be able to add is helpful in selling your research, right? Like why would we want you to do this? All right, do you have access to the right data? So this is a really important question. And it's not one that you might necessarily know or be able to answer right now off the top of your head. If you can't, I would really encourage you to look into this. Once you have your topic in mind, think about where is that data going to come from? Because finding data is not necessarily difficult, but has to be thought out. So if you're looking at a topic that is so narrow and hasn't really been explored, again, I just said that could be good, but think about where your data is going to come from. If you can't collect enough data to support your research, then you really don't have research, right? You have maybe a literature review on indirect literature that you put together, but you don't have, your own primary research to contribute. So think about the data. Oftentimes, students will say, yeah, my network in industry, or I belong to a professional organization. And those all sound good, but when it comes down to the reality of data collection, there's more to think about, right? So if you do belong to a professional organization, they may not allow you to solicit members for data collection. So you want to be thinking about these things and finding out now. So you're kind of getting that soft, the kind of a soft, not, I won't say permission, but looking at it gently. Now, you're not trying to get anyone to commit to permission right now, but just to see if it's allowed. When you talk about professional networks, even if it's not a professional organization, people say, oh, I know enough people in my industry, I can certainly get them to answer. Keep in mind, generally, and this is, not exact for every dissertation research, but generally, you're going to need somewhere around 100 people per category that you're looking at. So for example, if you are looking at the impact of organizational policies on employees, and you're studying in-person employees, fully remote employees, and hybrid employees, that's 3 categories of data, basically, that you need to collect. So that could mean that you need about 300 people, 100 from each. Now, again, I'm using 100 as a ballpark, so it may be less, it could be more. You will hear in other parts of the series and the summit about conducting the a priori power analysis if you're doing quantitative, and then ways to look at it from a qualitative perspective as well. So again, 100 as a ballpark, but keep in mind about 100 if you're kind of doing single category, but if you're doing multiple categories, it could mean that you need more people. So having access to the right data is definitely a consideration. And sometimes, you can answer all the first 3 and be like, yep, good to go. And then you get to 4 and you're like, okay, maybe not. So definitely start thinking about that and talking to people now. Little disclaimer here, all topics must be approved by your advisor, the college, and university. So, all right, problem statement. So moving more into what we're here to talk about. You can see here, your first task is to describe your problem in terms of so enticing as to make the reviewer eager to examine the rest of your proposal. So we all know that whenever you write a report for work or anywhere else, that you want to really gain your audience's attention, right? Whether that's a presentation or a report or whatever. So how do you do that? You've got to come right out of the gate with something that's going to get their attention and say, oh, I want to know more. Tell me more. I want to read more, whatever it is, right? So again, think of the problem statement and your initial work a little bit as that catch, right? That pitch to say, hey, I've got something that you might be interested in learning more about. All right. State the problem clearly. This is so important. So I mentioned that oftentimes I will go back and forth for weeks on just the problem statement with my advisees before I make them move on. So now I know all of you are running from having me as an advisor right now as I say that, but it is very beneficial because it is so important to be sure that the problem is clear. And again, we'll keep talking about that as we go. Then you're going to answer, okay, what gaps need to be filled? And we just talked about that. Are there gaps in the literature? Are there gaps in research in the industry or in academia? Problem statements can either be a statement or a question. It depends on what it is and the direction you want to take, whether you will frame it as a statement or a question, but that's something to consider. And then stating the problem, how is this assisting with your overall argument, right? The direction of your research. So what does the problem do for the argument? Well, it shows the importance of it. And the problem needs to be something, because remember, it needs to be something that is industry or field and discipline applicable. remember, in the DBA program, this is an intersection of academia and industry. So we're not just doing research for the sake of doing research. We want to have something that is applicable to industry or specific field, but something in the professional arena that this is going to help make sense for. All right, generality. We have not talked about this yet in the session. So we've talked about how narrow or broad maybe a problem statement could be, but you also want to be researching that is generalizable, meaning that it's going to not just apply to this few people or few organizations, that it's going to apply a little more broadly. Now, the level of generalizability will vary in your dissertations. It does impact, how often it might be useful after, obviously, but it's okay if it's not a wide-ranging generalizability, but it should have some generalizability so that it's not just so narrow. It is okay to have your context be narrow. So for instance, going back to the hiring practices in hospitality, in hotels in the Philippines. Okay, well, you might look at that and you probably find a lot of articles that have a similar title to that or something, right? And you might be thinking, okay, I am not in the Philippines. This has nothing to do with me. But even though their context is the Philippines and hotels, if you are researching hotels, that could still be very useful for you, even though you're not looking at hotels in the Philippines. If you're looking at hiring practices, nothing to do with hotels, it still could be useful to you. So again, just because you have a narrow context does not mean that you're diminishing the generalizability, but it is a fine balance, and your advisor will help you with that as well. Limiting the problem and the focus. So I call this shiny object syndrome. You want to have a problem that you are sticking with, and everything you do stays on track to support this problem. When you're reading the literature, you're going to find something else, or, oh, I could pull this in, or I could add this in. And that's okay when you're trying to figure out your research direction. Once you've solidified it, you don't want anything that does not follow and support this problem statement. When you're writing, you are writing for a general audience as well as an academic or an industry audience, but while you don't want to, there's going to be some information that you have to explain explicitly. And then there's other information that is very obvious and you don't have to spend a lot of time on the obvious. All right. What you're trying to do as you set up your problem statement is really give the reader the perspective of your entire proposal. Like, where are we going with this? All right. So again, what research problem are you trying to solve? You've seen something in industry or read about something, and now what can I do to contribute to this topic area? It doesn't mean you're going to solve the problem, right? We come out of many dissertations and many research studies where we don't actually solve anything, and that's okay. But did we get a little closer? Did we contribute to the knowledge base? Did we offer something that can help move the ball a little bit further down the road, right? So this problem is a problem because if left untreated, it could have negative consequences on either, you can see here, group, organization, or individual. So any layer there. What makes it a problem? So how did you find your problem? Well, maybe, again, you observed it or you read about it, whatever, but most of our students tend to have observed or experienced the problem that they want to focus on, and that's great. But you also need to have some support. It's not just student A saying, hey, yeah, I've seen this as a problem and I'm going to research it. Okay, but is there literature that can affirm that? So the role of the section where you are stating your problem and then supporting it, because when we talk about a problem statement, yes, it can be literally a sentence, a question, or a statement. And that's kind of your like quick elevator pitch one, right? But then you also include support as you're developing your dissertation work, the support for the problem. And so the goal here is to provide information that is trustworthy and, the research that connects to it and shows these connections and how this information can be helpful in the field, the industry, et cetera, as well as providing that academic literature, contributing to that academic literature. So the problem statement concisely defines the topic to be studied. So that's what you keep hearing me say. And in that topic statement, you may also have uncertainty, right? Like, is it a problem? You may not be sure. So maybe you want to explore, is it? Or you may be finding literature that basically is on both sides. Yes, it's a problem, or no, it's not, or yes, it's a problem, but from this angle or this angle. So all of the previous research that's been done isn't necessarily going to line up in one neat pile for you and all agree or disagree or, have the same direction. And that's part of the excitement and the challenge of bringing all of that together in your literature review. All right, so again, all about clearly stating the problem and establishing the importance, because again, this is your time to share with your audience what it is, how you're going to get there, and why it's important to do so. I think of the problem statement as my strategic plan. So I mentioned a few minutes ago the shiny object syndrome, right? You don't want to be including or chasing anything that does not support your problem. So think about a strategic plan for an organization. If that strategic plan is a 5-year plan and there are certain goals within that plan, if something else comes up that isn't necessary or something that's a contingency or an emergency that needs to be put in, if it doesn't support one of the goals in the current strategic plan, then chances are the time, effort, energy, resources are not going to be put into that item. Maybe it gets included in the next strategic plan, your next article, whatever, next research study. But for this one, you need to stay on track with your plan. So your problem and your purpose become your guiding lights, right? So they become your mission and your strategic direction, basically. And again, I'm reiterating here, how did you come to this problem? Sometimes when you're stating a problem, it's obvious the way you state it in this particular section that, oh yeah, that's the problem. Sometimes it's not as obvious to the reader, or it can get lost. So there are times when I will allow a student to not use the word the problem in the words the problem is, because it's very clear. If you're unsure or you're getting pushback from your faculty or peers with feedback that what is the problem here, then you want to probably move to the language the problem is, right? State it very clearly, or the problem being investigated is some form of that. So again, throughout the dissertation process, it always has to come back to clarity. As your dissertation committee reads your work, we are constantly going to be saying, this needs to be clarified. This needs more clarity. And part of it is just human nature, right? You're going to be so attached to your topic. You're going to have read the information that you submit to us many, many times. And so it's very clear to you, right? Because you wrote it, you're working with it very closely. And then we read it and we're like, that doesn't totally make sense. Your advisor is going to get a little bit of your same syndrome of looking at it and being like, oh, that looks good, because they're going to get close to your work as well. So it is extremely helpful to have a committee looking at this, because different eyes are going to catch things at different times. However, working with your advisor, you are going to be pushed to be sure that there's clarity every step of the way. So I'm veering a little bit into the purpose statement here. If we know the problem, okay, so it's a problem. Well, now what's your purpose? How are you going to explore this? What is it that you're going to be looking at? What angle are you taking? And then your research questions are kind of also part of the strategic plan. So it's kind of the trifecta, right? It's the problem, the purpose, and the research questions that really guide your work. And you don't want to include information that does not address the problem, the purpose, or the research questions, because otherwise, why would you include it, right? All right. So specifically, problem versus purpose. What are we looking at here? So the problem describes very clearly what you will be researching or what you are researching. The purpose explains what you hope to accomplish through this research. So by doing this research, by the end, the intent is to what? And that can vary. Again, in a practical or applied research program, we're not doing research just for the sake of doing research. We're trying to come out on the other side with some kind of information that is going to be useful and helpful in industry as well as academia. So again, you can see here the statement, problem and purpose will serve as your guiding plan, your strategic direction. All right, so what's the problem? Well, I love this quote from Albert Einstein. If I were given 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 59 minutes defining the problem and 1 minute solving it. I think that quote is so important for us in our program and how it stresses the importance of the problem, right? 59 minutes defining the problem, 1 minute to solve it. So that goes back to where I said I sometimes will spend weeks with my students just refining that problem statement, because if it is not clear and solid, it is very difficult to move forward. Think about if you have a wobbly foundation and you're building on it, it's not going to help anybody as you move forward. All right, so what is the problem you are trying to solve, and what is the evidence for this problem? So again, is there industry evidence? Is there academic literature or scholarly support for this? Sometimes you may, as I noted, you may only be seeing an industry. Maybe the academic or scholarly literature has not caught up yet. So that's a perfect niche, right? Usually if it's in scholarly research, it's already out there in industry as well, but sometimes not always the case. Maybe it hasn't been applied for whatever reasons. So looking for evidence, even though you need to have that literature support, again, maybe your direct evidence and support is coming from industry and the literature provides that indirect support. So it's just going to depend what your problem is in terms of where you're going to find the support and what kind. All right. Problems can be identified in multiple ways. And so you are very familiar with the literature, whether you've had one consistent topic since your first course or whether you've been exploring multiple topics, you understand when you're reading literature that, you're probably able to identify gaps in certain topic areas. The contradictory evidence is also helpful sometimes, because if you're seeing this, but literature says the opposite, okay, well, how do we bring the two together? And maybe that's where your research lies, in that connection. Personal experience. All of you have had many personal experiences, years of it in your industry. And so this is helpful because you're noticing problems, you're hearing of problems, you're working on these problems, right? So again, it's totally fine to have identified a problem through personal experience, as long as it can be then supported through direct or indirect academic literature, not just trade or industry literature. And then discussions with experts. So you may talk to the leaders in your organization or in your industry and say, what are the problems that we are facing over the next few years? And what does this look like? And are there areas that would be helpful to explore and find out more about? So that's definitely a viable option in terms of finding your problem. All right. I'm not going to reiterate that. You can read that one. So problem statement development. So this is sort of a generic problem statement development direction. So first you have your topic, which is your subject area, right? Then your research problem. This is what we've been talking about: the concern, the issue, the problem, something that needs attention at least. Justification for the problem. So is there evidence in the literature, and or is there evidence in industry? deficiencies in the evidence. What's missing? Where are the gaps? And what do we need to know more about? Who will benefit from your research? So, how will addressing what we need to know help researchers, policymakers, et cetera? So again, it's kind of connecting that academic and industry side. I'm going to flip to the next slide where I have an example of this information. So for this one, our topic, very broad, but ethical issues in HR. Okay. The research problem. So the problem is, and it's starting with that language, that multiple ethical issues are present in mainstream hiring practices. Now, this doesn't include context, what industry or, what kind of hiring, but that's okay for now. Again, that may need to be narrowed, but for our purposes in terms of what we're looking at here, we're okay. So the problem is these ethical issues that exist in mainstream hiring. Like, why is it happening? Justification for the problem. So there's a gap in literature, maybe, where there's a lot of literature on hiring practices, but not necessarily addressing the current ethical issues that are popping up. Industry justification here, increased EEOC claims, and in this case, it would be for ethical issues that the claims are focused on, right? So that can definitely be an indicator that, hey, there's going on here. There's a huge increase in claims. So either and if we're talking specifically again about ethical issues, either ethical issues are running rampant and now the claims are being increased, or maybe it's the case that ethical issues are an easy target for EEOC claims. So maybe not that they're increasing, but more people are realizing that they can get attention from the EEOC by placing a claim about an ethical issue. Who knows, right? That's what you need to find out through your research. And then deficiencies in the evidence. So description, identifying, and characterizing the violation. So now what exactly are we talking about, right? So what ethical concerns and what is out there to support this and what is out there maybe that maybe doesn't exactly show that this is happening. And you can't really solve for a negative, right? But how do we show that gap? And then who will benefit? So in this particular case, assessing violations helps recruiters develop better ethical standards within their organizations. It helps applicants to understand the ethical issues. The ethical issues. So this is a good progression. Could it be tighter? Yes. But again, this is helping you to move in the direction for your development. Okay. So research problem examples. This is a very concise one. Only 6% of CEOs in Fortune 500 companies are women, and this is taken from the Center for Leadership Studies. So, okay, this was in 2019, which is also important. When you are stating your problem in your work, if you have a main source that supports this, and it is from 2006, well, there's been a lot of years since 2006 and a lot has happened. So is it still a problem? As your advisor, I'm going to tell you, I need to see some updated sources there so that I know, okay, that's fine if you want to put something in from 2006, but then something from 2022 to show that it is still a problem, right? So something to think about, but these are just examples of the problem statements, not necessarily the support for them. All right. In this one, you can see it's phrased with the problem to be addressed by this study is the decline of employee well-being for followers of novice to mid-level managers. Okay, that's fine. Again, 2014 is getting a little bit older now. That's, 11 years old. So you probably want to find something more recent to support that. Low voter turnout has been shown to have negative associations with overall civic engagement. The rest of this paragraph supports that statement. And regardless of your problem statement, it's going to be that one sentence, but then as you develop your proposal, you are going to expand that with more support. And then here you can see there's a lot more support for this one, but the problem is in the middle of the paragraph. In this case, I would always recommend using the language, the problem, because otherwise it gets lost. And different people, different advisors may have you consider placing it in different places, the problem statement in different places. So some like it right at the beginning, and then you show your support. Some like to build up the support, then place the problem statement at the end. Sometimes it's in the middle. So if it is not very clear, and I would say at the beginning, then it increases the likelihood that you might need the words the problem is or the problem addressed. So the problem addressed in this study is whether or not leader behaviors in traditional work settings are applicable to the remote work. So again. All right, moving on here. So arguments and issues. So at the heart of any argument is the issue. And in this case, we're talking about the problem that we are going to be researching. Issues give rise to points of view and conflicting positions. So this is where I was explaining that you may find literature on both sides. And maybe you don't agree with one side or the other, but that doesn't mean you just exclude it from your literature review, right? You have to acknowledge that it is out there. All right, when you build an argument, you must take a position and support it with evidence. So while you have your position and you're supporting that, again, if there is a counter argument, you want to be able to show that as well. So we have the STAR criteria here, which is sufficiency, and then, is there enough evidence, which we keep talking about? Typically, is the evidence representative and typical? So this goes back to that generalizability. And then accuracy, is the evidence accurate and up to date? I'm going to circle back to typically for a second. So I said generalizability, which is what we usually refer to when we're talking about is our data, our findings, are they generalizable? Here, when I'm saying typical, is this like a problem that you would see not just in one little minute organization, but larger? So I'm using the word generalizability here in terms of the problem and how it might apply to a larger context versus just one small area. All right, and then accuracy and relevance. So is the evidence relevant to the claim? So you can't state a claim and then be supporting it with something that doesn't connect. You need to have clarity and very clear connections. All right, so framing your argument. So what does this look like? All right, so you are not the first one likely to have ever researched this topic. And again, if it is very niche and narrow in the context, there is some larger conversation that has been occurring, right, in the indirect field. So you are entering this conversation already in progress. You're coming in with your research. So your argument should guide your audience, which is your dissertation committee, but also broader, right? Because other people who are looking for articles and dissertations to support their work are going to be reading your work as well. Your family might have the best of intentions and say they're going to read your dissertation. The likelihood of that is probably low, but if you continue on and your dissertation will be published in ProQuest, and if you write an article, other people will read it. So take heart with that. But at least right now, your committee, and then hopefully beyond that. So you want to make sure that you're guiding your reader, your audience, down the road that you are taking and your proposed course of action. All right, so you should be able to answer the following questions to the reader. Like the reader should come away going, okay, I understand why this should be studied. Okay, I understand the problem. What are the consequences if we don't? And those might be explicit or implicit. It depends, again, on the actual problem and how it's being set up. And then what contributions will this study make, your research? Because in the existing literature is the existing research that's out there, because we want to make sure that this has academic value as well. All right, so more about framing your argument. So how to frame your argument. You always want to start simple, right? So you have a very simple argument. You're going to state your position, which is central to the argument here. your points should be in logical order. And just a helpful hint, when you are writing anything in your dissertation work, you always want to stay in the same order. So for instance, your variables or your factors or your research questions or your problem statement, however it is stated, every time it comes up, it should be stated that way. So for example, if you are looking at leadership in textile design centers. Okay, fine. So let's add something to that. Leadership and support resources for employees in textile design centers. Great, okay. So now every time you write something, leadership should come first, support resources should come second, your research questions, the one with leadership should be first, the support resources should be second if they're separated. So in your literature review, your sections, it should be leadership first and support service resources after that. And it doesn't necessarily mean it comes right after it. There, you might have, subsections, et cetera. You might also be talking about the textile design industry first. So that's fine. But in terms of your argument, your key points should always appear in the same order throughout your work. It's just helpful for you and helpful for the audience. And then you're going to summarize your statements. So, basically reaffirming this argument. Okay. So this is the classical structure of an argument. And you can see here it starts at the top with the introduction and goes clockwise around the circle. So this is essentially what you are doing at every step of the way, so developing your problem statement, but then also throughout the entire dissertation work, right? So you have an introduction, the statement, the background, the support, the proposition, so what it is that you're going to do. Proof, not a huge fan of this word in research, but at least evidence, right? The confirmation that this is a problem, this does exist, there's some support out there for it. The refutation, meaning so the counter arguments to it, and then the conclusion. So you would see all of these segments just in your problem statement section, but then also, like I said, the whole dissertation follows this structure as well. All right, so a conceptual versus a theoretical framework. I have this in here because it can be very helpful to you in developing your problem statement. So as you're trying to get all of your factors in the right order and the problem and what is it and what is my scope, having a conceptual framework can be extremely helpful. A theoretical framework is also helpful, maybe not at the problem statement point, but will help guide you through your work. So let's take a look here. This is a conceptual framework. All that means is literally to draw out how your components, your factors, your variables, whatever they are, depending on your research, how they fit together, what is the relationship. And you can see the relationships with the arrows also indicated by what hypothesis number they connect to as well. So sometimes I know it can be overwhelming. People look at this, they see a lot of dots and arrows and lines, and it gets confusing. It does not have to be confusing. You can create very simple ones. So here is one that is much simpler. And you can see it is very important to make sure that your arrows and lines and all of it go in the right directions. And again, just like the problem statement, this is probably going to take you a few rounds back and forth with your advisor to say, wait, this variable should be here, or this should be over here. And wait, don't these connect to each other? So you can see here, the health-oriented leadership is actually connected here to both the emotional job demands and the worker well-being. And then we have the stress mindset here, which is acting as a moderator, kind of connecting to those. So a little bit simpler than this, and this is fine too, but it doesn't have to be. All right, here's one. And the reason I put this in here, I know it looks so complex, but this is a framework that was chosen, but only the pieces, the components encompassed in the green outline are what was used for this research. So in this, you can see the research questions and sub-questions are connected to the pieces in the green. The rest of the framework may have been explained, but they were not the focus within this research. So again, you can take something complex, and if you're, you only have so much time to conduct your research, write your dissertation. So you want to do something that is manageable, and maybe adding all of these factors would not be manageable, but exploring this through a certain pathway could be very doable. All right, this is a theoretical framework. So this is based on Vroom's theories, and you can see it's different than something like this that shows the connections and the relationships of your factors, your components, whatever, and it takes you into the theory. You are going to have, well, you may have, let me restate that, a theoretical framework for your work, and this will come after the problem statement typically. So it's going to help you to organize your work and show what pieces you're looking at. It could be part of your problem statement development if you have a theoretical framework that in mind or that you're working with. Maybe these end up being factors that you need to explore. But more so, this is probably going to come in form of research question development and things like that. Maybe not quite in the problem statement. It could be helpful, but not totally necessary if you don't have one. All right, so a good argument answers these questions. And we've talked about a lot of this already. Why is this issue important right now? Why is it controversial? Is it controversial? It may be. And some of the more exciting ones are, right? And what are others saying? So this is that evidence, that support in the literature, or the counter arguments. Who's on my side? What are their credentials? So that literature that's supporting your argument, or in this case, your problem, is it coming from industry? Is it coming from literature? Is this well-respected literature? Are there some seminal works in this area? Or are they, two dissertations that you happen to stumble on, but there's nothing else? So keeping that in mind, what are the credentials? Not that dissertations are not valid and good sources, but they are not considered, in terms of the scholarly support. You don't only want to have dissertations, you want to have mostly peer-reviewed, academic, scholarly published articles. All right, who's on the other side? So again, kind of coming down from that counter argument. Why are they wrong? So this is important. So when you introduce your counter argument, you want to also say why you don't think that's correct, which is why you're pursuing this direction. I wouldn't say that they are wrong, but again, you're trying to show why your direction is the one that makes sense. All right, how are they right? Okay, so in summary, what have we talked about? Going back to the beginning of the session here, the importance of the dissertation handbook. This is your friend. You should have it available to you so that whenever you're working on a piece of your dissertation work, you can review that section in the handbook and just make sure that you're on track. There's a lot of helpful information in there. I don't expect you to memorize it or read it all the time, but at least to become familiar with it and kind of, know where to look for the items that are relevant to you at any given time. Argument in the dissertation proposal. So making sure that that is clear through your prospectus and your proposal work, and making sure that you have that clear problem statement with a valid, connected purpose statement. Framing arguments and argument theory. So again, that's what we talked about towards the end, how to frame this all together and pull these pieces together. So what's your problem? So now, hopefully this presentation gives you a little bit more information to help you start framing, framing your problem and thinking about how you'll word it and what direction you might go in. As I mentioned earlier, it is an exciting time because the wheels are starting to turn. You're starting to move down that track towards actual dissertation work. So you definitely have some time between now and then, but it is a good time to start thinking about all of these components. So as you review articles, maybe you have a little bit of a different take now. Now, as you review them, you're kind of focusing on, okay, what is my problem and how am I stating that? Or what am I seeing in industry? And when I read an article, oh, wow, that would support this. keep a log of your articles, whether you do it in one of the software programs or Word or Excel, you know, what the article is, kind of the citation. I would save them because I can't tell you how many times you go back to a link and that link is gone even 2 weeks later. But if you're looking at it 2 months, 2 years later, so always try to save the articles. But that aside, in your notes, you know, making those connections. What is this article good for? So that when you go back to your articles, you're not having to like reread everything to know, shoot, what was this supposed to support? You can have them organized. Just something to do in the spare time you probably have, right? You're in a doctoral program. All right. So if you do have questions on this or on problem statement development, you can reach out to any of us, but please feel free to reach out to me. We can have a conversation. You all know who I am, but my contact information is there just in case. So at the bottom, it says, trust the process. This is one of the most difficult things in a doctoral program, but dissertation writing especially, because it's hard to trust that process. It really is. You're going to get told that often. So just keep that in mind. It's okay. Trust the process. You will get through. Thanks for your time, everybody.